All right. So, you guys, you clearly like to stay in the know and you're curious, about how people are feeling about entertainment these days, right? Like it's a wild world out there, especially with streaming. And we're really excited to have some fresh data, fresh off the presses polling data from Ipsos from October 2024. That's really going to dive into all of this. So we're ready to find out if you're, with the masses or if you're kind of an outlier when it comes to your streaming loves and frustrations.
Yeah, I think this poll really gets at what a lot of people are thinking about. You know how the streaming landscape is changing and how people are relating to it?
It really does. And one of the things that really struck me right off the bat was this idea of choice overload. Too much to stream. So this poll actually confirms what a lot of us suspect, which is that there are way too many streaming services. According to the data, a majority of Americans, 57%, feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of platforms. Like it's hard to keep up right.
Right. And I mean, it makes sense, right? Like every time you tune around, it seems like there's a new streaming service, a new subscription to sign up for. But here's the interesting thing. While 57% feel overwhelmed by the options, a nearly identical percentage, 58%, say it doesn't actually make it harder to find something to watch.
So are people stressed but still finding their niche? I mean, like, think about it. I'm like, okay, I might be overwhelmed standing in the cereal aisle,
Yeah.
but like, I pretty much know what I want, and I'm going to find it.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I think people kind of have their go-tos, but this does raise the question of like, how satisfied are people with how these services are actually organizing their content? Because if you have like a ton of choices, but you can't find anything, that's still a problem, right?
For sure. So what does the data say about that? Like, are people generally happy with the way things are organized?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's pretty much split down the middle. 52% believe that media companies are doing a worse job at organizing their content, while 45% feel they're doing better.
Okay, so almost half and half.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly there's room for improvement, right? It seems like viewers are craving better curation, even if they are ultimately, finding things to watch.
Yeah.
But let's switch gears for a second
Yeah.
and talk about another important topic that came up, representation in media. Because it's not just about, what we watch, it's about who we see on screen, right?
Absolutely. And this poll really gets at the sense of disconnect that a lot of Americans are feeling between what they want to see and what they feel is actually being represented in movies and TV shows.
Yeah, and this feeling of exclusion, it's not limited to one particular group. Like the poll showed that people across a range of backgrounds, different sexual orientations, political affiliations, even ages, and you name it, we're reporting feeling like their demographic is underrepresented, or sometimes even worse, like portrayed negatively.
Right.
And that's tough to see.
It's really disheartening because when you don't see yourself reflected in the media you consume, or when you only see your community represented through a very narrow lens, it can really make you feel like you're not fully seen or understood. And it feeds into this larger feeling of disconnect. Like the stories being told on screen don't reflect the realities of your life or your values.
And it's not even just about like us as individuals feeling seen, right? Like it kind of ties into this bigger conversation about who gets to tell these stories in the first place,
Right.
and what messages are we all consuming. Speaking of which, this poll also kind of wades into some touchy territory. The perception of political bias in Hollywood. So what did the data reveal there?
Well, it turns out a lot of Americans are on the same page here. The poll found that 37% believe that Hollywood is too liberal.
37%, huh? I mean, that's not nothing, right? Were there any differences like across party lines?
Yeah, for sure. Republicans were far more likely than Democrats to agree with that statement.
Okay, that makes sense. But I think the bigger takeaway here isn't about whether that perception is right or wrong. It's just that it exists. And for a lot of viewers, it really colors how they view entertainment.
Totally. It creates this sense of us versus them. And it can make it hard to just enjoy a movie or a TV show when you feel like the creators have a completely different worldview.
For sure. For sure. Now, were there any specific findings about which groups people felt were most underrepresented?
Yeah, there were. According to the poll results, you shared people with disabilities, and Asian Americans were identified as the groups most frequently excluded from movies and TV.
It's 2024, and that's still the case.
It's disheartening because representation matters, and when entire groups are consistently left out of the narrative, it sends a message that their stories aren't worth telling.
Exactly. And on the flip side, did they ask about groups that people felt were overrepresented?
They did. Interestingly, Americans pointed to wealthy individuals, liberals, white Americans, and gay or lesbian individuals as the groups most likely to be overexposed.
Okay, so we've got this sense of too much of this, not enough of that, and this whole other layer of, Hollywood pushing an agenda. It's a lot. So for the person listening right now being like, yeah, this is my experience, what are the key takeaways here?
I think the biggest one is this. You are not alone. If you feel overwhelmed by streaming choices, or like you're not seeing yourself reflected in the media you consume, or like certain viewpoints are being prioritized over others, you're not imagining it. A lot of people feel the same way.
It's so validating to hear that, right?
It is. And beyond that validation, I think this poll encourages us to be more mindful, more critical consumers of entertainment.
What do you mean by that?
Don't just passively absorb what you're watching. Think about the messages being conveyed, the perspectives that are and aren't being represented.
Be more intentional about it.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah, be more intentional with your viewing. But like, is that actually possible? With everything that's out there, did this poll tell us anything about whether people are actually able to find content that aligns with their values?
Yeah, I did actually. Remember how we talked about how a lot of people, like 39%, feel like they can't always find entertainment that reflects their values? Well, a nearly identical percentage said they can consistently find entertainment that resonates with their beliefs.
Okay, so it's possible, like maybe it's not always easy, but people are finding what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the fact that there's just so much content out there now. There are more creators than ever before telling stories from all different perspectives and catering to all sorts of niche interests.
So even if the big budget movies aren't always hitting the mark, there are other options.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the current media landscape, even with all the frustrations we've been talking about.
More voices,
Yeah.
more perspectives, more choices.
Precisely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into all things streaming and entertainment, what's the one thing you want to leave our listeners with today?
That's a good question. I think it would be this. Entertainment is never just entertainment. It's a reflection of our culture, our values, our hopes, and our fears. So be mindful of what you consume, support diverse voices, and never be afraid to question the narratives you encounter.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions. Until next time, happy watching, everyone.